Thank you very much, Dr. Werner Zittel, for coming to the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy. It is an honor for us to be with you. And thank you very much for the excellent lecture you have given to us. And we would like to ask you some couple of questions. I would like to focus on the topic of sustainable development. To what extent do you consider development and environmental responsibility to be mutually exclusive? And do you believe a compromise be reached between emerging and developed nations which will allow sustainable economic growth?
That's a complex question. Now, let me start or try to answer it. First of all, our economic principles are the basic behind that we believe that sustainability and economic growth or economic behavior is in conflict. But actually, sustainable behavior is the guideline. Only for a short period you can stress the limits of our planet over its limits. And this is exactly what we are doing now. This cannot hold on for a long time. And what we see at present especially is that the resources we need to feed the growth of the economies, the resources are coming to an end, which means they are not depleted, but the speed to dig them out of the earth, it reaches a limit, a peak, and then the speed will decelerate and decline. In other words, this means in the past we have consumed and produced each year more resources than in the year before, and this will turn in the other direction. Just that we have only the chance to produce less, each year a bit less. This is due for fundamental reasons, because the development speed has grown up so fast over the last century and especially over the last decades that it's simply not possible to hold that speed any longer. And this holds for all, for developed countries as well as less developed countries. But in the past, actually, it was really the realistic, if you look realistic, that the industrialized countries have used the resources to a much larger extent, that it would still be possible to use the same amount of resources for the other part of the world. So we have broken a limit, that's for sure. And this resource extraction we have consumed so fast, this also has brought the sinks of our planet to a limit, which means the atmospheric capacity to deal with the waste products of our consumption, which means climate change, of course. And it doesn't matter if you look to oil consumption, to coal consumption, to gas consumption, or even to iron ore, to copper or whatever. We have digged out faster, consumed faster, and this was the background or the backbone of our economic growth. And as long as this paradigm, which is and cheap energy, fossil energy is cheap and abundant, as long as this paradigm holds, as long economic growth and climate protection is in contradiction, there's a conflict we cannot solve. We can try to take voluntary measures. Some parts of the world make it a bit better than others, but the basic principle is just there's a conflict in between. And only when this paradigm changes, which means that fossil energy becomes more and more expensive than the environmentally alternatives, only then we will see a shift. And we have only the two measures, either that at an international level that politics agrees to put an additional fee on the fuels, but this I guess will never happen, or at least never in the extension that we would need it. And the other hope which I have is that resources are depleted faster than the demand switches, which means then that the fossil fuel prices grow up and speed up extremely. And this is just what is going to happen. We have almost since about the year 2000, this part of the game has started. We cannot feed the hunger of the countries any longer. And this means the industrialized countries, they already have hit a limit. They already had to reduce the oil consumption since a few years, since about 2007, 2006. And only this allowed the developing countries still to grow. And if you look to the statistics, even in the year 2008 and 2009, when we had a worldwide recession, the developing countries still increased their consumption of resources, while the industrialized countries had to reduce the consumption. And this was simply due to the rising prices. When there is still the hunger to buy new cars or to develop the industry in a country which didn't had the access in the past, it doesn't matter how high the prices are. They just do it, maybe a bit faster or slower. And this was just the reason. So there was a competition. The total amount of fuels was stable. It could not be increased anymore. But the share of the industrialized and less industrialized countries, it switched. And therefore, one reaction was that the industrialized countries had to reduce their fuels. Partly it was simple because for some efficiency measures, but mainly it was due to the high prices which hurt the economy. It was a recession, more or less. And this is what I mean. Sustainability is not a luxurious good which we can choose or not. It's a must. Just for some time we can surpass the limits. But this hits at us again, and we are now at the point where the worldwide economy shifts from, as I started in the beginning, from every year a bit more to every year a bit less. And this is the conflict we have to deal with. This hits both developed countries the same as less developed countries.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Professor, let me ask you a question about international climate change regulation. The question is, has the EU done enough to reduce their environmental footprint? Which continent do you consider to be least environmentally responsible? What can be done to encourage these countries to cooperate with climate change treaties and regulations?
Mm-hmm. It's true that inside the European Union, the reductions were very fairly well over the last years. This was partly due to the destruction of economies. If you think to the former GDR or Eastern European countries, which around 1990 or in the period following 1990 had a destruction of industry which reduced their consumption considerably. And in 2009 the crisis again. But there were also some measures which really were proactive in terms of climate change. New technologies were developed, politics were developed in the individual member states to foster these technologies. And the most prominent is the feed-in tariff system for electricity from renewables, which was really a success story and gave a push to the development and to the use of renewable energies. So this was really a good measure. And so partly the European Union or the member states have done their homework, but only partly. It's still too less to reach the goals, and it's still far behind the goals we need to achieve. The second part, it's not my point to accuse a specific country, but where we can see where it's very hard to follow the climate change issues and politics is North America. It has huge problems, and this has to do with the points which I already mentioned before. That I would point it in that way, that the new efforts to follow the fossil path as long as possible by digging out tar sands on bitumen in Canada or fracking of natural gas and oil in the United States. It's just part of that game. It's a desperate attempt of the economies to go on the old way as long as possible. But the longer they step on that way, the harder will be the decline, the catastrophe which will follow. So I will say it's a step function. It just the longer they rely on that old path, the steeper will be the fall off afterwards. So that's United States I mentioned earlier. Another part is Australia, which has a huge amount of resources, and the digging out of coal and of uranium is just part of the economic welfare. They sell it to other countries and get earnings before. Another point is China, which of course has the problems that its economy is just growing up, it's just waking up, and there are so many people, individuals, so it's very hard to stop that way. And inside China there are happening various things simultaneously, good things as well as bad things in terms of climate protection. The bad things are that coal is used in a very inefficient way very often, that new cars which use gasoline and burn gasoline are used in this and pollute the cities. The good things are that there are the leading countries which promote solar energy. 80% of the world market of solar thermal energy is produced and used inside China. That's very rarely realized. And wind energy there is one of the leaders of the use of wind energy and so on. So both things are happening together. And I think this is just a sign of such a time of where the paradigm shifts. The old way is followed as well as the new technologies are already established and take their way. And so for sometimes there's a battle between the competition between these technologies, but it's good to increase, to strengthen the new technologies, and this is happening around the world, partly lower, partly faster.
Thank you, Doctor, for your very good explanation about this question.
Well, I would go to another question in civic engagement. I would like to know how much influence can we as a civil society exert on climate change negotiations, and how can we pressure the unelected representatives of companies to act in an environmentally responsible way?
First of all, we should not blame other countries or other companies for polluting the earth. It's because of our activities, of our needs. Generally, each activity we do, it is related to some damage or influence to the environment. So the more we do, the more we pollute the earth. But the point is how we can choose in with different ways how we tackle how we manage our activities. And so it's also our responsibility that we in our personal environment try to be at the forefront of the shift, and to once we have options which we can choose very easily, take the polluting or the less polluting options, then it's a first step to take the less polluting option. But the second part is also to create some pressure on companies, on politics to follow that way, just to give them a signal. We want a change. But this has some drawbacks we have to keep in mind. See, the old way of polluting with a huge use of fossil fuels had an advantage. This was cheap products, cheap production and so on, and we wanted that. So we are also responsible for that part, and we should keep that in mind. But nevertheless, once we want to have a change, we really have to signal them we want a change, and even if for some reasons and in some aspects it has some drawbacks for ourselves, we have to choose what is more important. And unless we do not give the signal strong enough to the politicians, they never will follow. Because they first follow those lobbyists who are tying strongest, and then who influence them strongest. And when these are lobby groups from the companies, they follow their way, of course. If they're anxious, we follow that way, we are never re-elected again, then they will change.
Thank you very much.
And Doctor, our last question is regarding cultural diplomacy. How can cultural diplomacy be used to exchange ideas and best practices to promote environmental responsibility by governments and corporations?
First of all, I think it's very important to have such institutions to bring together different cultures and to exchange knowledge, to exchange background, and also to increase the understanding of different cultures, of the understanding of each other. This reduces the level of tolerance, or increases the level of tolerance, and reduces the risk of clashes and such things. So this is a very important measure, and bringing that together with the problems and which I've mentioned, this I think is a good idea, and even to initiate some ideas. Such meetings as today, these have also the chance that people from different cultures, continents meet together, learn from each other, and see, oh, here's something good happening, and maybe they can exchange ideas and spread it out.